и танки наши быстрые, и наши люди мужества полны. В строю стоят советские танкисты, своей великой родины цели. Гремят огнем, сверкая блеском стали, пойдут машины.
You already saw what I used for videos on German vehicles. This is a typical Tamiya box from the 1970s. No glossy cardboard. The illustration style hasn't changed much, but the paintings have improved a lot. The short sides show the front box art again. Here we find evidence that the box must be a reprint from at least 1990. We didn't have 5-digit postcodes before that year. On one long side we can see some advertising for more 1970s Tamiya kits. Of these I built a BMW motorcycle in the early 1980s. The second long side shows the front picture once more and some sentences in Japanese. If I had to guess, I'd say it's the vehicle's history. The kit consists of 4 sprues. 3 are from dark green styrene. The parts for vehicle and magazine machine gun are on the 2 larger ones. The figures can be found on the smaller one. Then there's a small clear sprue with a windshield and the headlight lenses. We look at the sprues one by one now. Let's start with the tub. It comes in one piece and the locators for the seats are huge. The pedals are molded on, but they look exactly like the actual ones. The bolts around the levers are nicely done and they'll surely pop out after a wash and dry brushing. The small flaps on top of the rear wheel wells also look very nice. Maybe I can find a couple of pigs with open flaps. I'd love to build one of these small boxes. As you can see, there's a bit of texture on the top. It can be found on all visible surfaces. The front passenger has less space for his feet than the driver because of the fuel tank right in front of him. The underside shows the massive ejector pin marks that were common for kits of that era. They won't be visible because the tub's bottom will be glued on top of the undercarriage. The tailgate has molded on tie-downs for the soft top. On the right you can see the locator pin for the spare wheel. The taillight is really big, but that seems to be correct according to the reference pics I saw so far. The inside shows more ejector pin marks. Some, or maybe even all of them, will be covered by the rear seat's backrest and the floor panel. The bonnet also comes as one part. The filler cap sits right in front of the windshield. I was wondering if these sharp triangular shapes could be engine vents for de-icing the windshield in winter. I just started taking a closer look at the many ref pics I found online, so I'll surely find some that show these in detail and make clear what they really are. The bonnet opens sideways in a left and a right half, as it was usual those days. Here are the wells for the headlights. This time the huge ejector pin marks on the fender's underside won't be covered, but they'll still be invisible unless you flip the car over. I'll fill and sand them, but you can get away without doing it. Here we have the inner wheel wells and the 2 front panels that sit next to the grille. There's a cutaway in the right wheel well for the exhaust. The headlights have a real thin rim and they look very much like the actual parts. It may be a good idea to remove a bit of styrene from the inner edge as it's a bit too wide. The rear will need a bit of work because the shape wasn't just flat. Removing the seam line isn't always easy on small round parts like these. And while I'm just talking about it, scraping off the seam lines and grab panels isn't easy either. I replaced them with handles from copper wire anyway. Let's take a look at the sidewalls now. The attachment points for the windshield are a bit too big and should be sanded to a smaller diameter to look right. Everything on the gas was bolted on, and Tamiya did a real nice job on the details. You will have noticed before that most edges need a bit of sanding. The bolts for the grab handles on the rear corner look realistic. On the insides of the sidewalls we find many ejector pin marks again, and in this case I wouldn't even think of leaving them as they are. Even if they might be covered with a tub, I wouldn't feel good about it. The same goes for the fenders. And the last view of the sidewalls inside. The grille doesn't look too bad, keeping in mind that it's just one part. Of course the gas emblem isn't detailed, and I'm sure it wasn't possible to do that 45 years ago. But with the light coming from this angle, you can see that there are huge sink marks on top of the grille's front. They need to be filled and sanded without destroying the emblem. I'll change this part by drilling out the radiator and sanding it thinner from the rear. Then I'll build a new radiator. Obviously, the Red Army didn't think much of a bit of comfort for enlisted men. While the seat's cushions are thick and look nice, although identical, the backrests are just plain steel. The cushions could use some work to make them look different. The actual steel tubes the seats were made from don't look exactly like these, but that doesn't matter too much. These ejector pin marks are really nasty. They will be difficult to fill and sand. I'll build new seats and I'll show it in detail. The rear seat looks nice, but I want to check if these edges were as pronounced as on this part. I haven't decided yet if I'll also build a new rear seat. The backrest doesn't look too bad, and you'll easily get away with the two parts for the rear seat. The steel angles need a good clean up and also could be sanded thinner for more realism. I found a couple of pics of the gas at a museum, and its backrest is made from wooden planks. I feel like building it that way. Here we see the toe pintle and the front toe hooks. They are crude and the toe pintle is much too big. I'll scratch build these parts, but you can also sand them into their proper shape. These are the canvas doors and they only come in the open version. If you want to build closed ones, that isn't difficult to do. There are many reference pics you can use. Here we see the fuel tank with massive sink marks and the steering wheel. The steering wheel's ring is a bit too thick and could be sanded thinner. The dashboard also has a deep sink mark. You can see that there were only a few gauges. Quite frankly, this part is horrible and will only be used as template for a new one. Steering column, brake lever and gear shifts. All they need is cleaning them up properly. Second sprue. The largest part is the chassis. You can see the texture on the steps again. The chassis is free of warpage and I leave the better part of it unchanged. Here's what I change. The front bumper will be made from copper sheet or very stiff aluminum foil. The rest will just be cleaned up. The axles and drive shafts are one piece each for front and rear. I guess I'll leave the rear axle as it is, but the front axle steering mechanism will be rebuilt. The drive shafts don't look like this on the actual car, but they won't be visible, so I'll only remove the seam line. These are the front leaf springs. I never saw anything like this before and I think it's a very smart construction. On pics of the actual car I noticed that the two springs are not connected with this half ring, so I'll change that too. The seam line on the inside is very pronounced and has to be removed for a proper fit. The rear leaf springs are usable. The sink marks in the center will be covered by the wheels. The wheels aren't bad. The rims are nicely done. Only these holes should be opened. There are bolts missing on the spare wheel and the two open spots should be drilled out. The inner parts of the rims come close enough to the actual parts. As you can see, there's almost no seam line at all. That'll make cleaning them up easy. Nonetheless, I have something else in mind. Here's the exhaust, and according to the reference pics, it needs some changes. You'll see that in the build videos. The exhaust pipe isn't open and you might want to drill it out. Last parts of the car are the supports for the soft top. I really don't know why Tamiya molded them this way. Italeri did the same with the Willys Jeep supports. It's unnecessarily difficult to align the three parts properly. I'll build them from copper wire and copper sheet. I'll just let you watch this without any comments because I'll only keep the machine gun's wheels. There are only three parts on the clear sprue. The windshield frame doesn't look much like the actual one, but keep the kid's age in mind. The actual tube is thinner and the glass has extra frames that are attached to the main frame with steel clamps. I'll try to build the complete windshield from scratch. The headlight lenses look nice. If you're going to use the windshield as it is, you'll be glad to hear that there's no distortion. I won't say anything about the figures and I'll only show you a couple of pics. I definitely won't use them. The decals provide us with 5 marking options and don't look bad at all. They're at least 25 years old, so I really don't know if they still can be used. Just in case, I ordered this small booklet on the GAZ because it comes with a decal sheet. The instructions start with 2 pics of the actual car and a rather in-depth history. We have 3 painting and 5 marking options. There may be some information missing. The black license plates look like Polish post-World War II military ones. Here are examples of the finished models. The build is straightforward and you're finished in 6 steps. Without any changes, you'll be able to build this kit in an hour, including cleaning up the parts. This is a very simplistic, almost primitive kit, but it's great for beginners. I hope there'll be a re-release for a fair price. A new tooling wouldn't be bad either, but it shouldn't cost more than 20 euros then. In my opinion, the alternative is way too expensive. Of course there are more parts than there's PE too, but a price of 34 euros or even more for a G-type car is ridiculous. If this GAZ fits as well as Tamiya kits usually do, you'll end up with a nice rendition of the car. As you saw, there's quite a bit of work necessary to clean up the parts, and if this was a new kit I wouldn't be happy about it. It's an old one and that has to be taken into account. Judging it from today's standards wouldn't be right, and you can't expect more of it than you just saw. The tooling techniques have changed a lot in 45 years, but with a neat paint job it'll turn out realistic enough. The only aftermarket parts I'll buy are these resin wheels because they look much better than the original ones. After looking at the reference pics I found details I want to add or improve, so this won't be a one-day build. It isn't necessary to do this in order to get a nice looking model, but that's where the fun starts for me. Kits like this are the perfect base for it. Hope you liked this short trip back to the Stone Age of modeling. Even then it was possible to build nice models to be really proud of. That's it for now.
Расцветали яблони и груши, поплыли туманы над рекой. Выходила на берег Катюша.